4 Italian mobsters walked into Harlem to kill a man. None of them walked out alive. 1943. The most powerful crime families in America told Bumpy Johnson to surrender Harlem or die. His answer started a war that changed organized crime forever. This is what really happened. December 1942. Inside Rao's restaurant in East Harlem, 7 men sat around a table covered with expensive wine and untouched food. These weren't businessmen. These weren't politicians. These were the people who actually ran New York City. The police worked for them. The judges worked for them. Half the politicians in City Hall worked for them. They controlled the docks where ships unloaded cargo. They controlled the unions that moved goods through the city. They controlled the gambling, the protection rackets, and the loan sharking operations that generated millions of dollars every single month. And they had a problem. A problem named Bumpy Johnson. Lucky Luciano was gone, deported back to Italy after cutting a deal with the government. Vito Genovese had fled to Italy to avoid murder charges. The power structure was shifting, reorganizing, and the 5 families were redrawing the map of New York City. Manhattan below 110th Street belonged to the Italians. Brooklyn was divided between 3 families. The Bronx had been sorted out. Queens was settled. Everything was organized. Everything was clean. Everything made sense, except for one neighborhood. Harlem. Harlem generated more illegal gambling money than anywhere else in New York. The numbers racket, what people called policy, was enormous. Every day, thousands of people placed bets on 3-digit numbers, hoping to win, knowing they probably wouldn't, but playing anyway because a 25-cent bet could pay out $300 if you got lucky. The odds were terrible for the players, but incredible for the operators. A good policy bank in Harlem could generate $5,000 a week in pure profit, and Bumpy Johnson controlled the biggest policy operation in Harlem, pulling in over $50,000 every single week. The men at Rao's restaurant had tried to be reasonable. They'd sent messages to Johnson. They'd offered partnerships. Frank Costello, who was running the Luciano family while the boss was in exile, had personally authorized an offer that was incredibly generous by mob standards. Johnson could keep running his operation, keep his people employed, keep his territory, but he'd split the profits 50-50 with the commission. In exchange, the families would protect his operation from the police, would keep other criminals out of Harlem, and would treat him like a partner instead of like someone who existed only because they allowed it. Most criminals would have jumped at this offer. Partnership with the commission meant protection, meant connections, meant you could operate without constantly worrying about getting shut down or killed. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't most criminals. When Costello's messenger delivered the offer, Johnson listened politely, didn't interrupt, didn't get angry, and when the messenger finished talking, Johnson's response was simple and direct. Tell Mr. Costello that Harlem isn't for sale, not for 50%, not for any percentage. This is our neighborhood, Hood, and it stays that way. The messenger went back to Costello and repeated Johnson's exact words. Costello didn't believe it at first. He thought maybe the messenger had misunderstood, or maybe Johnson needed time to think about it. So Costello sent another messenger, a more senior guy, someone Johnson would take seriously. That messenger came back with the same answer. Harlem isn't for sale. The third time Costello sent someone, Johnson didn't even meet with him. He sent word back through an intermediary. The answer was no the first time. It's still no. It will always be no. Stop asking. That's when Frank Costello called the meeting at Rao's restaurant. All 5 families sent representatives. They discussed the situation calmly, professionally, the way businessmen discuss a problem that needs solving. The question on the table was simple. What do we do about Bumpy Johnson? Some people argued for immediate action. Send a crew to Harlem, kill Johnson, and install someone cooperative in his place. The problem was solved in a week. But others pointed out that killing Johnson might create bigger problems. Harlem wasn't like other neighborhoods. The community was tight. The people protected their own. And Johnson was popular. He employed hundreds of people. He gave money to churches. He helped families who were struggling. If the mob killed Johnson, they might spark a race riot. And race riots brought federal attention that nobody wanted, especially during wartime, when the government was already investigating organized crime. After 3 hours of discussion, they reached a decision. They'd give Johnson one more chance. 30 days to reconsider. 30 days to be smart. And 30 days to accept the partnership or face the consequences. Frank Costello himself would deliver the message, not through a messenger this time, but through someone Johnson respected, someone who could explain the reality of the situation in a way that Johnson would understand. The message reached Johnson on December 20th, 1942. 30 days. Accept the partnership or the commission takes action. Johnson's response came 48 hours later. 3 Italian policy bankers had been operating illegally in Harlem, running small games without permission, paying tribute to the mob families downtown instead of to Johnson. These 3 men were grabbed off the street on the night of December 22nd. They were beaten severely, not killed, but hurt badly enough that they'd remember it forever. And they were dumped on a street corner in Little Italy with a note pinned to one man's jacket. 29 days. Then the real answer comes. Frank Costello read that note and understood exactly what Johnson was saying. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was a challenge. Johnson was telling the 5 families that he'd rather fight than surrender Harlem, that he was willing to go to war with the most powerful criminal organization in America, that he believed he could win, or at least make victory so expensive that the mob would decide it wasn't worth the cost. Most people thought Johnson was crazy. You don't challenge the commission. You don't tell the 5 families no. You definitely don't beat up their people and send them back with threatening notes. When that kind of disrespect got you killed quickly and publicly as a message to anyone else who might think about being brave. But Johnson wasn't crazy. He was calculating. He understood something that the mob families had forgotten. Harlem wasn't like Brooklyn or the Bronx or Queens. The mob controlled those neighborhoods through fear and bribery. They paid off the local cops and the local politicians, and anyone who complained disappeared. But in Harlem, that strategy didn't work as well because the community didn't trust the police anyway, and the politicians were already corrupt, but in favor of local criminals, not downtown mobsters. Johnson had something the Italian families didn't have in Harlem. He had legitimacy. The community saw him as one of their own, someone who took money from the neighborhood, sure, but who also protected it. Who employed local people, who kept outside criminals from coming in and treating Harlem like a place to exploit. Johnson was betting that the mob wouldn't risk an open race war, not in 1943, not with federal investigators already sniffing around organized crime, not when Italian gangsters attacking a black neighborhood would bring exactly the kind of publicity that could shut down operations citywide. If Johnson could make the war expensive enough and public enough, the mob would back down because backing down would be cheaper than fighting. It was a dangerous bet, the kind of bet that could get him killed. But Johnson had been making dangerous bets his entire life. and he was still alive and still free and still running Harlem. Now, if you want to see how this war ends, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next is absolutely insane. January 15th, 1943, 31 days after the ultimatum. Frank Costello's deadline passed, and Johnson hadn't backed down, hadn't compromised, hadn't shown any sign that he was afraid or willing to negotiate. The commission met again, this time without the diplomatic talk. They'd given Johnson a chance. He'd refused it. Now it was time for consequences. Frank Costello authorized direct action and handed the contract to Anastasia, who ran the enforcement arm of the organization. Anastasia was the right choice for this job because he didn't have any emotional connection to the situation, and he didn't care about race relations or community politics. He cared about solving problems efficiently, and Bumpy Johnson was a problem that needed solving. Anastasia put together a 6-man crew. These weren't street thugs. These were professional killers who'd done this kind of work before. The plan was straightforward. They'd grab Johnson's top lieutenant, a man named Junie Bird, who ran the day-to-day operations of Johnson's policy banks. They'd take Bird somewhere private and make him talk. Find out where Johnson kept his money, where he did his planning, where he slept, and whom he trusted. Then they'd kill Bird in a way that would be discovered quickly, and that would send a message. After that, killing Johnson himself would be easy because they'd know everything about his operation. Junie Bird had a regular Friday night card game at the Rhythm Club on 132nd Street. Same place, same time, every single week. Bird would arrive around 10 in the evening, play cards until 2 or 3 in the morning, then head home with whatever money he'd won or lost. It was predictable. It was routine. It was the perfect opportunity. Anastasia's crew planned to hit the card game at midnight, when everyone would be distracted and when the streets outside would be quiet enough that they could grab Bird without witnesses. What Anastasia didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson had informants everywhere. Corrupt cops who reported to Johnson while pretending to work for the mob. Bartenders who listened to mobsters talk and passed information along. Girlfriends of low-level mob associates who traded pillow talk for protection money. Johnson knew about the hit team 72 hours before they arrived in Harlem. He knew who was coming. He knew what they wanted. He knew when they'd strike. And he turned their ambush into his ambush. Friday night, January 15th, 1943. The card game at the Rhythm Club was happening exactly as it happened every week. Junie Bird was there, playing poker, laughing, drinking, looking completely relaxed and unaware. But upstairs, in a storage room above the club, 8 of Johnson's best men were waiting with shotguns and pistols. 2 more men were positioned outside, watching the street approaches. Another 4 were in a car 2 blocks away, ready to respond if backup was needed. Johnson had turned the Rhythm Club into a fortress, and Anastasia's crew had no idea they were walking into a trap. The 6 Italian hitmen arrived at 11:47 p.m. They parked their cars a block away and walked toward the club, trying to look casual, trying to blend in, which was impossible because they were white men in expensive suits walking through Harlem at midnight. They entered the Rhythm Club through the front door. Nobody stopped them. The doorman just nodded and let them pass, because he'd been told to let them pass, told to make this easy, told to help them feel confident and safe. The 6 men walked through the main room where the card game was happening. They spotted Junie Bird at a corner table. They started moving toward him, and that's when Johnson's men came down the stairs from the storage room. The shooting started so fast that most people in the club didn't understand what was happening until it was over. Johnson's men had shotguns, which are devastating at close range. The first blast hit one of the Italian hitmen in the chest and threw him backward into a wall. The second blast caught another man on the side and spun him around. The remaining 4 mobsters tried to draw their weapons, but Johnson's men kept firing, methodical and calm like they were at target practice. Within 2 minutes, 4 of the 6 hitmen were dead on the floor of the rhythm club. The other 2 were wounded, but managed to run, stumbling out the front door and into the street, leaving a trail of blood as they fled toward their car. Johnson's men didn't chase them. That was part of the plan. Let 2 survive. Let them go back and report what happened. Let them tell Anastasia that Harlem was ready, that Johnson wasn't hiding, that coming after him meant death. One of Johnson's men went outside, caught up to the 2 wounded mobsters as they were trying to drive away, and pinned a note to one man's jacket before letting them go. The note was simple. Tell Anastasia that Harlem protects its own. Send more men if you want. We'll send more bodies back. The 2 survivors made it back to Manhattan, bleeding and terrified, and reported to Anastasia. 4 dead, ambushed. Johnson knew they were coming. The whole thing was a setup. Anastasia couldn't believe it. Nobody killed 4 made men and survived. Nobody ambushed mob hitmen and lived to talk about it. This was a level of disrespect that couldn't be tolerated. The commission met in emergency session that same night. 4 of their men are dead, 2 more wounded, humiliated by a black gangster in Harlem. This couldn't stand. Frank Costello authorized unlimited resources. Whatever it took to kill Bumpy Johnson, whatever it cost, whatever needed to happen. But Costello also made another decision. This had to be handled quietly. If word got out that Johnson had killed 4 mob hitmen and the mob couldn't do anything about it, every ethnic gang in New York would start thinking they could challenge the commission too. The Jews in Brooklyn might get ideas. The Irish in Hell's Kitchen might decide they didn't need to pay tribute. The whole power structure could collapse if people thought the mob could be defeated. So this had to look like Johnson simply disappeared. Not like he won a war. Like he just vanished, and his organization fell apart, and the mob quietly took over, and business continued as normal. But Johnson did something brilliant. He made sure everyone knew what happened. Within 48 hours, every barbershop in Harlem was talking about how Bumpy killed 4 Italian mobsters who tried to take over. Every church, every pool hall, every restaurant. The story spread like fire. Johnson became a folk hero overnight. The man who stood up to the white mob, the man who protected Harlem, the man who proved that black gangsters could fight the Italians and win. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about pride and respect and proving that Harlem belonged to Harlem people. The mob couldn't send more hitmen after that. Every mobster who went into Harlem was identified immediately. People watched them, followed them, reported their movements to Johnson. It was like trying to fight a war where the enemy knew everything you did before you did it. Anastasia tried 3 more times to get to Johnson. Every attempt failed. One crew got ambushed and barely escaped. Another crew's car got firebombed while they were inside a building. A third crew was arrested by cops who Johnson had paid more than the mob was paying them. After a month of failures, Anastasia told Costello that direct action wasn't working. They needed a different strategy. That's when Costello changed tactics. Instead of trying to kill Johnson, he'd destroy his business. The mob controlled the police department. They controlled the judges. They controlled the politicians. Starting in February 1943, every single Johnson operation faced systematic harassment. His policy banks got raided every single day. His runners got arrested on sight. His customers got intimidated. His protection payments to corrupt cops were refused because the mob was paying those same cops even more money to target Johnson specifically. It was economic warfare, and it was devastatingly effective. Within 2 weeks, Johnson's revenue dropped 60%. He was still alive, but he couldn't operate. His runners were afraid to work because they'd get arrested immediately. His customers were afraid to place bets because the police were watching. His policy banks couldn't function because they got raided before they could collect the day's money. 3 of his policy bankers defected and started working for Italian-backed competitors. 2 of his enforcers disappeared, either bought off or killed. Johnson's organization was fracturing, and there wasn't anything he could do about it with guns. You can't shoot the police commissioner. You can't kill judges. You can't murder politicians without bringing down federal heat that would destroy everyone. But Johnson understood leverage. The mob controlled the police and the politicians, sure. But Johnson controlled information. He knew which cops were on mob payrolls and taking bribes. He knew which politicians had mistresses and secret bank accounts. He knew which judges were fixing cases. He'd been collecting this information for years because information was protected, and now was the time to use it. Johnson started a whisper campaign. He let it be known, quietly, carefully, through intermediaries, that if he went down, certain documents would be delivered to certain federal prosecutors. Documents that proved police corruption. Documents that showed politicians taking bribes. Documents that connected judges to organized crime. The same federal prosecutors were already investigating the mob as part of wartime anti-corruption efforts. Suddenly, the situation changed. The mob couldn't kill Johnson without risking federal exposure that could destroy their entire New York operation. Johnson couldn't operate normally under constant police harassment. Both sides were losing money. Both sides were losing people to small skirmishes and ambushes. Both sides were drawing attention that neither could afford. By March 1943, they'd reached a stalemate. The mob couldn't win without unacceptable risk. Johnson couldn't win without being able to operate his businesses. Something had to give. Then something unexpected happened that forced both sides to negotiate. A corrupt NYPD captain named James O'Brien had been taking money from both Johnson and the mob, playing both sides, getting rich off the conflict. O'Brien got drunk one night and told his girlfriend about everything. The gang war, the bribes, the corruption, the killings, everything. What O'Brien didn't know was that his girlfriend was an FBI informant. She reported everything to her FBI handler. Suddenly, federal agents were asking questions about mob operations in Harlem, about police corruption, about gang warfare happening, while American soldiers were dying overseas in World War II. Both Johnson and Costello realized simultaneously that this war needed to end immediately before federal investigators shut down everyone's operations. But neither side could be seen backing down. Johnson couldn't look weak to the community after becoming a folk hero. The mob couldn't look weak to other ethnic gangs who were watching to see if the commission could be challenged. They needed a mediator, someone both sides respected, someone with no stake in the outcome. Someone who could broker a deal that let both sides save face. They found that person in Stephanie St. Clair, the former Queen of Harlem policy, who'd been forced into retirement by Dutch Schultz in the 1930s, but who maintained relationships with everyone in the criminal underworld, black and Italian alike. St. Clair brought both sides to a secret meeting at a funeral home in the Bronx, neutral territory. A place where both gangsters and regular people came and went constantly, so nobody would notice the meeting. 3 in the morning, April 12th, 1943. Johnson brought 2 bodyguards. Costello brought 3. St. Clair sat between them and laid out reality. You're both losing money. You're both drawing federal attention. You're both making enemies. And for what? Pride? Ego? There's enough money in New York for everyone if you're smart enough to take it. 6 hours of negotiation. Both sides are arguing. Both sides are threatening. Both sides gradually realized that St. Clair was right. The war was profitable for nobody. After 6 hours, they reached an agreement. Harlem's numbers operation stays under black control, Johnson's control specifically. But Johnson pays 15% to the commission, not 50% like the original offer, 15%. In exchange, the police harassment stops. Johnson gets protection from other Italian families. Johnson gets a seat at commission discussions that affect Harlem. And both sides agree to mutual defense against outside threats. 15% was brilliant. Beyond small enough that Johnson kept most of his profit, but large enough that the Italian families had a financial stake in his success. They'd protect Johnson's operations now, because protecting Johnson meant protecting their 15%. It turned former enemies into business partners. But there was a secret part of the deal that only 3 people knew about: Johnson, Costello, and St. Clair. If either side broke the agreement, St. Clair would release documented evidence of both organizations to federal authorities. She'd created mutually assured destruction, insurance that forced both sides to honor the deal because betrayal meant everyone would go to prison. The agreement was signed on April 13th, 1943. But signing paper meant nothing in the criminal world. The real test came 72 hours later, when one of Anastasia's captains, angry about the deal, angry that the mob had compromised with a black gangster, decided to freelance a hit on Johnson anyway. This captain grabbed 2 guys and went to Harlem to finish what the official crews couldn't finish. But Johnson's security team caught them before they got close. Now Johnson had a choice: kill the captain and restart the war, or honor the new agreement. This decision determined everything. Johnson didn't kill the captain. Instead, he did something more powerful. He returned the man to Anastasia personally, along with documentation of everything the captain had confessed during interrogation. Johnson told Anastasia, "Your man violated our agreement. Under the old rules, I'd kill him. Under the new rules, I'm returning him for you to discipline. What you do with him proves whether this peace is real." 24 hours later, the rogue captain's body was found in the East River. Anastasia had killed his own man for violating the peace with Bumpy Johnson. That sent shockwaves through the entire underworld. The rules had changed. A black gangster had forced the Italian mob to respect him and to honor agreements with him. That had never happened before. Over the next year, the Johnson-Costello Agreement became the template for how ethnic gangs worked together in New York. Jewish gangsters saw that cooperation was possible. Irish gangs realized that respecting territories could be more profitable than fighting. The rigid hierarchy where Italians controlled everything started evolving into a confederation where power came from capability and respect rather than just ethnicity. Johnson had changed organized crime permanently. By 1944, his operation was generating over $75,000 weekly. The Italian families got their 15%, over $11,000 every week, without doing any work or taking any risk. Johnson kept complete control while having the commission's backing, which made him untouchable. Everyone profited. Everyone saved face. Everyone respected the boundaries. December 1943, exactly 1 year after the original ultimatum. Costello and Johnson met for dinner at Rao's, the same restaurant where the Commission first declared war. They ate together, drank wine together, and discussed business like old partners. As they left, Costello said something that captured everything. "You know, Bumpy, when this started, we thought you were being stupid. Turns out you were being smart. You didn't win by beating us. You won by making it more profitable for us to respect you than to destroy you." That's real power. Johnson walked through Harlem that night, past his policy banks still operating, past his runners still working, past the community that had protected him. He wasn't just a gangster anymore. He was proof that even in the criminal world, respect could be forced if you were smart enough and tough enough and strategic enough to make destroying you more expensive than accepting you. Click the next video to see what happened when the mob tried this same strategy in Chicago, and it went completely differently.